All right, I got a little bit cut off there, but I do want to kind of wrap this up and continue with this. So we do have a little bit more to kind of talk about here with nativism. And so it's important to understand this ideology of scientific racism and kind of the meaning of whiteness in America at the time. So there really is this big racial divide, and they don't kind of see it in the same way that we do. We would say, of course, Italians and of course anybody from Europe is considered to be white, but that's not how they see it. They kind of see these grades. So they have complete inferiority are blacks all the way at this end, whites are all the way at this end, Northern European whites, and then in between you kind of have these gradations. You have it's maybe Chinese here, right down there with the Africans, and then Italians and Jews are kind of like in between. They're not quite white. They're not quite. They would lump them in. The Americans would lump them in with as far as inferior, with what they consider the blacks at the time in American society. And so it's a very racist belief system, and it's based in social Darwinism, scientific racism, this white man's burden that's floating around in Europe at the time, and all this stuff is kind of infiltrating into the nativism that's popping up in American society during this time period. So nativism is not a new thing, and you have to remember that nativism is not a new thing in America. They had it with the Irish and the Know Nothing Party and kind of political nativism, and it's going to come back. You're going to have political parties that are going to kind of adopt nativist ideology. The fear of the foreigner is nothing new, and it's still here today in American society. So one of the other reasons that you're going to get this fear of these new foreign cultures is going to come up with two terms that I think you've probably heard before as ways to describe immigration: the melting pot or the salad bowl. Now, the melting pot, I think, is the most common, is that they call it the Great American Melting Pot. Different civilizations or different cultures, they come to America and they kind of mold into our culture. So kind of like seamlessly, a melting pot, if you put things in a melting pot, they kind of lose their characteristics, or they kind of adopt each other's characteristics, and it all kind of blends together. Now, so that's kind of how they viewed immigration prior to the new immigrants here, that they kind of eventually molded into the American mainstream. They became Americans. Now, when people start to kind of look at the new immigrants, the term that comes up is something called the salad bowl theory of immigration. And if you look at a salad bowl, you have lots of different things in the salad bowl, but they might be mixed up, but they don't kind of blend together. They don't mold together. They're all kind of separate. And this can kind of refer to the fact that they don't assimilate into American culture as fast as these other groups did. Eventually they do, but it takes a long time. And they retain their cultures, their customs, and people will complain that they go into these neighborhoods, like an Italian neighborhood or a Jewish neighborhood, and it feels like they're in a foreign country. And you hear Americans say the same thing today, and they go into different neighborhoods. And so, the thing again, I always bring this up, the thing again is a poor understanding of history when people make these arguments today, because, give it some time, and people will mold. They will mold into the American mindset. And so the salad bowl, in the literal sense, can refer to the different ethnic neighborhoods that are going to pop up in cities across America. So your Little Italies, your Chinatowns, that are going to kind of pop up all over cities in America, and they're really kind of not 100%. They're never, 100% an ethnic group. But in some cases, they're 50, 60% one ethnic group. Sometimes the different immigrant groups live together. Maybe street by street is different ethnic groups. And so this is going to kind of pop up throughout American cities at the time. And this adds to and fuels to the growing nativism, saying, like, look at them. They're not becoming Americans. They don't even want to become Americans. They're keeping their language. They're not coming into the American mainstream and being like us. And so you kind of have two sides to it here, the foreigner's perspective and then the American's perspective. Now, there's some other reasons that are going to kind of pop up for why nativism is going to grow at the time. And what you're looking at here is kind of a banner for something called the International Workers of the World. And this refers to, this is really a communist organization. And it's a communist, almost kind of like a communist, I don't want to say labor union, but a communist organization that was an international organization. Now, this is much later, so don't confuse this. This is not the 1890s or turn of the century America. It's starting to grow a little bit. This is later on, like maybe 1915, 1918. that time period. And so these new immigrant groups are going to kind of be labeled as radicals in American society with things that are considered anti-American. And communism, even at this time period, is considered to be a very anti-American belief system. Or, belief system is the right word. And so specifically the Russians, because of what's going on in Russia in 1917, the Russian Revolution, but also the Italians are kind of seen as like these instigators and maybe causing labor strife. And remember, the government is mostly on the side of business at the time, at the side of industry. So this is kind of seen as anti-American. Labor unions we're going to talk about tomorrow are sometimes seen as anti-American. And so this is going to kind of help the nativist movement to grow in the United States, kind of painting immigrants as all being these radicals who are, want communism or want anarchy or want to overthrow the American system, the American way of life. Now, overwhelmingly, the group that's going to get kind of treated the worst in American society and kind of get the short end of the stick here are going to be the Chinese. So some acts that are passed that really, in a way, target the Chinese population coming to the United States. One of them is that's big as the Naturalization Acts. And so this specifically, just like the 14th Amendment specifically says the right to American citizenship is for men, this one specifically says that the rights for citizens are regulated to Europeans or whites and those of African descent. So it specifically on purpose leaves out the Chinese. And so for the Chinese, up until about, I believe that the years of the 1940s, they do not have American citizenship. They cannot fully vote. They're not full participants in the American democracy. And this is 1870. So 10 years later, it kind of goes a step further. The Chinese become the only immigrant group, the only country ever in American history that is not allowed to come here. This is called the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. And so Chinese immigration was just stopped completely. They weren't allowed to come to the United States. Those who were living here could stay here, but they couldn't vote. They were not full citizens, and they couldn't send for their families in a form of like chain migration or chain immigration, the way that a lot of them wanted to. And so they were kind of stuck here in limbo. And so this cartoon, I think, is good because it kind of shows you on the side another term here, that the door itself, that the Golden Gate, as what they refer to the United States as, for Golden Gate for immigration. But also on the side there, you kind of see like, listen, we're letting all these other people in, the communists, the nihilists, the socialists, these people who want to overthrow the government, but no Chinese. We can't have the Chinese in our country. And really, again, this is based in strong racism, on scientific racism, on social Darwinism, and kind of this inferiority beliefs that and how they view specifically the Chinese and also the other immigrant groups here. Because later on, we're going to talk in the 1920s, they passed some very restrictive laws to try and stop the other immigrants from coming, the Southern Europeans, the Italians, and the Eastern Europeans, the Jews, because they look at them as, again, polluting their racial stock of people, the Northern and Western Americans. And they're going to pass these immigration quota laws for the first time ever to restrict the amount of people. Before this time period, during this time period, there's no such thing as an illegal immigrant. You can't be an illegal immigrant. It's open immigration. But after this, in the 1920s, well, kind of fueled by this nativist movement, they're going to pass these laws to restrict Italian immigration, restrict certain areas from coming to the United States because they don't like the types of people that are coming in. And so, again, you kind of see the darker side of American history here with the racism and the discrimination that was commonplace in, 1890s, early turn of the century America. All right, guys, I'll see you guys tomorrow in class.